Hi folks, how are you doing? Today is the 6th day of June 2024. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning, I think. Yes, it's exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. How are you doing? Today we're going to talk more about controlled opposition and the dangers of controlled opposition and the damage that controlled opposition does. In this case, I'm going to share with you two clips from Anna Kasparian on the Young Turks. Supposedly on the side of ceasefire, supposedly on the side of stopping this whole thing, supposedly calling out the IDF and Benjamin Netanyahu and all the Zionists. I don't think she mentions the word Zionist in the video. I can't remember if she did or not. And also calling out the United States Congress, rightly so, for pushing this stupid fucking sanctions thing against ICC prosecutors who are bringing charges, have now decided to bring charges against Benjamin Netanyahu and, of course, Yair Gallant, the Minister of Defense in Israel. Many more could have been brought out against them in Israel, but just those two, because, of course, they had to bring 3 against Hamas and just 2 against Israel. They're always conscious of these things. She rightly calls out the United States Congress for their fucking perverse sanctions against the ICC, claiming that the ICC has no basis. How dare you bring anything against fucking glorious Israel? Israel couldn't do any fucking harm. She rightly points this out. However, during her 17-minute video, I'm not going to play, I'm just going to do clips I've taken from it. During her 17-minute video, she really makes it clear why people like Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian and all of these others are allowed to continue, not only on platforms with a large audience, talking about such things as genocide and what the IDF is doing, but they're allowed to continue to monetize, they're allowed to continue to make fucking bank, because they are what's called controlled opposition. They will expose so much, however, just so much, right to that edge. However, what they won't do is go beyond that. They won't talk about, a lot of things that, like, apex influence and various other things that the IDF and Israel have been involved in over the years. But then they have to bring you back. They have to manage the alt-left, in this case the alt-left, to the point where they're full of self-righteous indignation over the genocide and, stop. However, they always hit home the notion that Hamas are evil terrorists and should be removed. So what does that do? That Hamas committed atrocities, and so they're evil terrorists and must be removed. Literally, the last clip I'm going to show you, she says Hamas should be removed. What does that do? Who else says Hamas should be removed? All the people she talked about, and called out in the Congress, who said the ICC should be sanctioned for daring to do anything, issue fucking warrants against Bibi, Netanyahu, and Gallant. They all say Hamas should be removed. So too does Joe Biden. Hamas should be removed. Hillary Clinton, Hamas should be removed. All the fucking neocons, Hamas should be removed. And of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Gallant, all of the fucking Zionists in Israel and outside Israel, Hamas should be removed. Well, how do you remove Hamas? Do you ask them politely to leave? No. You keep fucking bombing Gaza. If we're all in agreement that Hamas are ebil terrorists and must be removed, then, oh my God, we're going to say, oh, the civilians, oh this, oh that, but Hamas must be removed. Ergo, Mr. Gvir, Mr. Gallant, Mr. Netanyahu, please, continue. That's the message she implants in the minds of the people that watch her on the fake alt-left. She also had some nice things to say, choice things to say about evil Putin. Evil Putin must be removed. That's not fucking alternative to anything. That's exactly what they want. That's what Gvir wants. That's what Gallant wants. That's what Bibi Netanyahu wants. But what Bibi Netanyahu wants them gone, kind of. If they were gone tomorrow, he'd have a problem with that because that would be the end of the fucking war and he would be going to prison. He'd be out of office. Snap elections. There's no question. There's no question. And he would go to fucking prison because of prosecutions. So he'd have to hop on a fucking plane and try to escape before they catch him. Okay? I'm going to show you how, without a doubt, proof positive, Anna Kasparian is a propagandist for Bibi Netanyahu and Gvir, the Likuds, and the Jewish Power Party. Okay? No question, no bullshit. This is the first video clip I'm going to share with you. I've clipped these things. I didn't just set them ready. I clipped them for you. I'm doing work here. Jesus God. Have a listen.
The chief prosecutor's decision absolutely makes sense, considering the disgusting atrocities that were committed by Hamas against Israeli civilians on October 7th. Around 1,200 people were killed, hostages were taken, and even children were slaughtered. No one has a problem with the ICC targeting Hamas. Well, I mean, other than Hamas, of course.
Okay, no one can possibly have a problem with anyone targeting Hamas. The ICC targeting Hamas. No one. You can't possibly have a problem with that, according to Anna Kasparian. If you do, something's wrong with you. She won't argue certain things, and she'll tell you in a few seconds she won't argue certain things. Sorry, let me fix this. She won't argue certain things, like the right of an occupied people to defend themselves, even militarily. She won't argue that because, you know, I'm not going to have any, I'm not going to hear any of that. I just won't listen to it. Nom, 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 nom. This is literally her approach because she can't defend it. But what does she say? She talks about killing civilians. 1,200 people died, which is what? 1,200 civilians. That's what you're supposed to think. That's what your mind is supposed to connect to. That's not even close. That's not even close. Let me show you what I mean. These are the official numbers from both Al Jazeera and Wikipedia, which is the CIA's Wikipedia. On October the 7th, 2023, 1,139 people supposedly were killed. Now, these are numbers that are generated from, even the Al Jazeera recognizes, they are numbers generated from, officially generated from, Israeli Social Security System and the IDF. Okay? That's 12, that's not even 1,200, that's 1,139. You're rounding up an additional fucking 60. That's great. What did they say? What did Al Jazeera say? Al Jazeera said there were 373 security forces and soldiers, either police, security for the rave or whatever, settlers, armed settlers, or IDF, who were stationed in these different little things all around the fucking fence. Now, keep in mind, I showed you the very first day I did the very first video on this when it happened. I showed you they were less than 500 yards from the fence. Both the kibbutz and this fucking rave. They were less than 500 feet, 500 yards. That's 5 football fields. Okay? 5. And they were partying hardy. Young people happy, dancing, raving. wiggling, doing X, having a good old time. Less than 500 yards, 5 football fields from the world's largest open-air prison. From what has been described as a ghetto. Not in the sense of Detroit, but in the sense of the ones back in 1930s. And some people have described it as a concentration camp. You can't do that because concentration camps involved industries that the occupiers would force the slaves to work in. You can describe what's happening in West Bank as concentration camps, but not Gaza, which is one of the reasons they want Hamas gone. But this is the reality. Even according to the CIA, 348 of the 1,139 people were security forces and or soldiers. Okay? I'm sorry, 291 of them. 291 of them. The Al Jazeera number attributes more as soldiers. So basically, you're looking at about 700 Israeli civilians who were killed, not 1,200, as she would misleadingly try to have you believe. 700 Israeli civilians killed on the date. The rest were soldiers. Now, again, everyone talks about this. Well, there's still people, Scott. If you are an occupying power that is keeping 2.3 million people on the other side of the fence, 500 yards away, in a near starvation state, and not allowing them to move about, or to leave the country, or to get aid in, or to develop their own industries, and you are regularly killing them. 230 have been killed since January the 1st to October the 6th in Gaza. 230. If you are an occupying power doing that to a people on their own fucking land, and you are a soldier, or you are a security force 500 yards from the fence, you had better be constantly aware of the fact that anything could happen. And when I say that, what I mean is to say is the occupied people have a right to defend themselves at any given fucking time. So, oh my God, 1,200 innocent people. We're now down to 700 killed by evil Hamas. Really? Let's take a look at that, shall we? Another Israeli witness confirms Israeli tanks killed their own fucking people. Another Israeli witness confirms Israeli tanks killed their own citizens on October the 7th. This is from Reuters. Military said on Tuesday, following reports, some Israeli civilians may have been killed by friendly fire in the fighting. And of course, the Associated Press. Friendly fire may have killed their relatives on October the 7th. A lot of people talking about how many. It's not a question as to whether or not. We know that Israeli tanks fired into that fucking kibbutz, Bibi, and killed the Israelis who were killed inside that fucking building, those buildings. We know that for a fact. That was the same building, by the way, that the I-24 reporter staged that bullshit scene with all the IDF people standing around looking all sad. That was the same kibbutz. That was the same kibbutz. The damage to the buildings, they were all standing around going horrified at the 40 beheaded babies, the atrocities Anna Kasparian is talking about. That was the same kibbutz. They were standing around the buildings destroyed by their own tanks. Efra Katz was likely killed by the IAF helicopter fire during October the 7th abduction attempt, according to a probe by the Israelis. Air Force investigation finds gunship fired at vehicle carrying both terrorists and hostages with surveillance systems unable to distinguish between them, killing Cat 68. Remember I told you about how they decided to bury all those fucking vehicles? You say, Scott, what vehicles? These vehicles? No, not those vehicles. Those vehicles weren't destroyed, and the houses like that weren't destroyed. That's not in Israel. You know what that is? That's in the West Bank. And that was February of this year, 2024. And that was a series of attacks, including burning fucking cars and such. Burning cars and such. Carried out by Israeli settlers against Palestinians. And they torched houses, and they went in and fucking... That was supposedly one of the worst single slaughters of Palestinians by enraged fucking Israeli rabid fucking Zionists. Ever. Where's the news on that? They're talking about the atrocities committed. Anna Kasparian talking about the atrocities committed by Hamas on October the 7th. Where's their talk about this? Would you like to see the difference between these burned cars and these? Notice the damage to the cars. Notice holes in the roof. Holes in the roof. Holes in the roof. These are cars that were destroyed on October the 7th. These are the ones they buried so that you would never see the fucking evidence. That the damage caused to these cars was not by gasoline or Molotovs. It was by high explosive residue from Hellfire rockets. All of these cars. Were some, I guess an RPG possibly, sure, why not? Okay, why not? But an RPG does not do that. Notice all the damage from above on these vehicles. All the damage from above. What some of these things do is people misunderstand what these things do. Let me see if I can explain a little bit. They think that a rocket has a detonator on the tip, and it's going to go, and it's going to go hit the ground, and when it hits the ground or a building, it blows up. Well, some are like that. Others are fired, and when they reach a certain altitude or a distance from the ground, they detonate, sending a concussion wave. Instead of hitting the ground and going boom in a small area, they will detonate in the air and go boom and send their fucking concussion wave down, which is what you see in the roofs of these cars. A lot of them are caved in. RPG doesn't do that. Also doesn't put bullet holes that big in the tops and the roofs of cars. Many of those cars, not all of them, but many of those cars, these atrocities that Anna Kasparian is talking about and attributing to Hamas were actually committed by Israel. And that's just to talk about the tanks and the Apache helicopters. I remember there's an article, there was a story, and it was from Apache helicopter pilots talking about how they emptied their fucking, they spent all their fucking ammunition. They went back to the base. They landed. They got reloaded with ammunition. I'm sure they hydrated. And they went back up into the air, went back out there, and did it again. Multiple times. They had what's called weapons-free order. They were so desperate to get all the Palestinians out because they thought they were being invaded. They didn't know what the point was. They said, doesn't matter. It's like the testimony from that tank pilot or captain or commander, whoever she was. who said she was deliberately told, specifically told by a guy when they got to the kibbutz to open fire on the fucking, she goes, well, there's Israeli hostages in there. They're like, it doesn't matter. We got to kill them all. We got to kill the Palestinians. And she said she refused. Other tanks clearly didn't. But she did give the order to her gunner to open up with 50 caliber fucking machine guns through the goddamn walls of that building. How many of the Israeli hostages were killed by that? Who knows? But we do know this. Beyond any fucking doubt, we do know this. Let me continue. Israel has admitted to immense amounts of friendly fire on October the 7th. Casualties fell as a result of friendly fire on October the 7th, but the IDF, the Israeli military, believes that it would not be morally sound to investigate it. That was December, boys and girls, of 2023. Anna Kasparian talks about, to this day, the atrocities committed by Hamas. Israel does indeed appear to be covering up a lot of the evidence, the Jerusalem Post reports recently, that cars containing bloodstains and ashes of Israelis who died on 7 October would be crushed, and what the paper said was a first, and buried in a cemetery. Drone footage released by the Israeli military last month shows the extent of the destruction of cars fleeing the supernova rave, likely inflicted by Israeli drones and helicopters. All of that. All of that. Shredded. Those cars are already shredded. Look at that. Crushed from the top down. Crushed from the top down. Let me say it again. Crushed from the top down. In every single one of those cars, those vehicles, where there is evidence of a body that was a civilian, Israeli civilian, you can easily take a test for residue of high explosives and tell exactly what killed them. And that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, is why they crushed them, shredded them, crushed them, and then buried them in a cemetery, where no one will ever be allowed to dig them up and test that metal. And Anna Kasparian talks about the atrocities committed by Hamas. So again, let me ask you a question. How many civilians were killed by Hamas? 1,200, as Anna Kasparian would have you believe? 639. 695. How many? Well, of course, they're not going to do any investigation. And in fact, if you pay attention to what's happening in the Israeli media, they have no intention of checking or finding out. Because according to them, it would not be morally sound to investigate. How about the beheaded baby story? How about that story? How about that atrocity committed on October the 7th, Anna Kasparian? Oh, that was a lie. That was bullshit. How about the systemic rape? How about systemic rape, Anna? How about that? Oh, yeah, that was also a lie. That big New York Times story, everyone was like, oh my God, systemic rape. Bo, please stop. Systemic rape. They had the whole thing. They had all the evidence. Turns out it was all bullshit. It's all bullshit. But the atrocities committed, according to Anna Kasparian. The atrocities committed by them. How about, oh my God, the baby in the oven story? Yes, there was a baby in the oven. Says this guy who happened to be working for an NGO, who runs an NGO, and knew early on that if he could help provide proof that Hamas are evil, then he would get all kinds of fucking donations flooding into his fucking NGO. And that's what he did, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. It was total fucking bullshit. It was a baby that was killed either in a car, burned to death, or in a kibbutz, blown up and burned to death by Israelis. And so he took that and said it was in an oven. Of course, the reference being obvious. I don't need to fucking make it for you. I hope I don't. And so when he came out with that evidence and his NGO, of course, they flooded him with fucking shekels. Which is why he did it. All fucking lies. Every single one of them. I'm going to play for you something here. We're going to play the second part of Anna's ode to fucking Ben Gvir.
Overwhelming response by the IDF in Gaza. And that's not to say that Israel didn't have the right to engage in a defensive war. They absolutely did. But can anyone with a straight face argue that Israel hasn't gone too far in the way they have prosecuted this war? For the people out there who say, no, Israel didn't have a right to defend themselves, I don't even take those people seriously. I'm not interested in that conversation. Atrocities were committed on October 7th.
There you go.
So this isn't a debate,
no,
in my mind, about whether or not Hamas should be taken out.
Whoa, 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 whoa. What did she say?
Or not, Hamas should be taken out.
Hamas should be what? What should happen to
or
Hamas?
Not, Hamas should be taken out.
What should Hamas do? What should they do to Hamas?
In my mind, about whether or not Hamas should be taken out.
Oh, Hamas should be taken out. Thank you, Anna Ben Gvir. Thank you, Anna Bibi Netanyahu. Thank you, Anna Gallant. Support our work at TYT. The same people, the same fucking people who sent money to that guy's NGO who made up that bullshit story about babies in the ovens, and you know what reference he was making to. The same ones, as soon as that thing happened, as soon as she said that, there's no doubt in her mind, there's no debate in her mind, Hamas should be taken out. They whipped out their fucking boxes and their fucking checkbooks, and they just started writing checks. Writing checks to Anna Kasparian and Cenk. They got to keep that shit going. Keep those lefties going. No debate. It's a great deal of debate. There's a great deal to debate, Anna. First of all, the question is that you put it the way you so carefully put it, the way your fucking writers so carefully put it, and your thought leaders so carefully put it. No one's going to debate whether or not Israel has a right to defend themselves. I would. And I'll put it this way. I'll give you an example. Did the French have a right to defend themselves when they were occupying, Vietnam? And they were setting up, rubber plantations. And they had like forced labor of all these Vietnamese. And some of the Vietnamese decided, fuck this shit, I ain't doing this. And they went through and they killed a couple of these colonialists and these families who were living the high life on the plantations in order to free the fucking slaves they were fucking profiting from. The slaves that the Vietnamese who were fighting were their brothers and sisters and fucking wives or husbands. Did France then have a right to defend themselves and attack fucking Vietnam? All of Vietnam. To get those insurgents? Of course not. No, nobody would argue that. Nobody. Give you another example. Back in the day here in the United States. Go west, young man, go west. When the losers and the uneducated were hoping for a piece of that American dream, to get a piece of that land and work that land, and make something of themselves, And they packed up their shit and they got in little buggies and they went across the West. Which, of course, wasn't the United States or America at that time. It belonged to the Sioux, it belonged to the fucking Mohawk, it belonged to a number of original nations, First Nations. And they came through and they killed and they maimed and they hurt. Of course, we don't talk about those things. They were all fucking Little House on the Prairie, good Christians, and all they did was want to give them Thanksgiving meals and share the good word of the good book with them. Bullshit. They killed, they maimed, they stole. They had little fucking raiding parties. Then all of a sudden they realized just how dangerous the Apache were, the Mohawk were. Did we, as a nation, have the right to go after the First Nations and the Indians, or the Native Americans, however you want to put it? Do we have a right to go after them when they went through and slaughtered a couple fucking settlers? Women, children, the elderly. Do we have a right to slaughter them, wholesale slaughter? Send General Custer out there to take them out, to give them blankets with fucking smallpox on them, to put them on reservations until we decided, oh my God, look, they've got some oil in that reservation. Let's burn them off of this, area of the reservation. We'll retake that. Did we have the right to do that shit to them? Did we, Anna? I'd say no. By the same token, when you got your prime minister going before the UN 2 weeks before October the 7th. And he's pointing at a fucking map that he's had made up of the new Middle East. And there's Israel. And Palestine is wiped the fuck off the map. And he's pointing at glorious Israel. Showing everybody in the fucking world what his intention to do is take it all for glorious. Do they have a right to self-defense? When 230 fucking Palestinians were killed from January the 1st, 2023 until October the 6th, 2023, do they have a right, the Palestinians, to defend themselves, to fight back? Well, according to international law, they certainly do, Anna Kasparian. They certainly do. I know you don't want to have these debates. In your mind, there's no room for debate. In your mind, Hamas must go. Which means the slaughter must continue. That's what it means, Anna. If Hamas must go, the only way to get rid of Hamas is to keep bombing them. Ergo, Anna Ben Gvir, Hamas must go. However, the right is affirmed in the context of the right of self-determination of all peoples under foreign and colonial rule. The United Nations General Assembly, UNGA, has expressly affirmed the right to Palestinians to resist Israeli military occupation, including through armed struggle. What, by the way, is the right to resist? In international law, the right to resist is closely related to the principle of self-determination. It is widely recognized that a right to self-determination arises in situations of colonial domination, foreign occupation, and racist regimes that deny a segment of the population political participation. Racist regimes, foreign occupation, sure, all of that. Ergo, does Hamas have the right, the elected political party that is Hamas, have the right to resist their occupation militarily? Even with, oh my God, an incursion into fucking Israel, which frightens the Israeli people. Absolutely they do. There is no goddamn doubt about that. Who committed the atrocities? First of all, there were no beheaded babies. There was no systematic rape. And, of course, the baby in the fucking oven thing was bullshit. The atrocities. Who killed the 691 civilians? Who killed the vast majority of them? I would posit, looking at the evidence, before it was hidden by the Israelis. Based on statements from Israelis, drone pilots, helicopter pilots, tank commanders, and of course the eyewitnesses who survived who were Israeli. I would posit that the vast majority of the civilians were killed by Israelis. But of course, as they said, it wouldn't be moral to investigate it. Moral meaning it wouldn't help the most moral army in the world to realize, for their fan base back in Israel to realize they had no problem wiping out Israeli civilians and killing Israeli children. At best count, 33 Israelis under the age of 18 were killed. At best count. Again, that is by the Social Security Administration in Israel, and numbers released, the numbers everyone goes on. Even Al Jazeera goes by now, the ones that came out in December. Okay? 33 or 34. We don't know how many of them might have been carrying a weapon. We don't know how many of them were killed by Israelis when the bomb went off right above their car and burned and crushed their fucking car. We don't know. There's a number of them. Atrocities committed by fucking Hamas. No, these aren't atrocities that were committed by Hamas. They were atrocities committed by the same people, by the way. If you think you have a hard time believing that the IDF would give the fucking order to go ahead and kill Israeli civilians as well, they've given the order to go ahead and kill Palestinian civilians as well. They don't give a shit. The leadership doesn't give a shit about how many civilians they kill, whether they're Palestinian or Israeli. Here's the question. Does Israel have the right at this point to demand that Hamas is no longer in charge in Gaza? No, of course not. No, the right to self-determination. Just because would Iraq have the right to tell the people of the United States? Because what happened was under the Republican Party, and Hillary Clinton backed it, of course the Democrats backed it, back in 2003. Does Iraq have the right to come out and say, hey, you fuckers, the Republican Party's crazy. You got neocons. Fuck you. No more Republicans. You can't have Republicans anymore. Republicans are gone. You got to make up somebody else, the Greens or the Independents or the fucking Libertarians, but the Republicans are gone. Fuck you. Kiss my ass. Just because you were the victim doesn't necessarily mean you have the right to determine how our country runs itself. Fuck you. Now, all that being said, Nazi party popping up in Ukraine, does Russia have the right? Does everybody have? Should we have the right to say, fuck you, you're out? Yeah. Slightly different. I know maybe maybe it's hypocritical of me to say that, but yeah, no, Nazis, no. Man, no. Sorry, no. Nazis, no. Papa Doc Duvalier comes back into fucking Haiti? No, sorry, no. No, I'm not doing that. You're not allowed to run by Nazism. You're not allowed to run by voodoo countries. No. But aside from that, so Israel has no right to determine whether or not Hamas doesn't run or does or does not run the government in Gaza. What they want is Hamas gone because Hamas resists. Hamas resists the Palestinian Authority. This is their way of resisting. They pull their pants down and they bend over. And they ask, please, would you use some lube? That's the resistance of the Palestinian Authority, and that's the kind of resistance the IDF likes. That's the kind of resistance Netanyahu likes. That's the kind of resistance that fucking Ben Gvir likes. And apparently, that's the kind of resistance that Anna Kasparian likes. When she says, Hamas got to go. Okay? Hamas has a right Obviously, the people of Palestine have a right to determine their own fucking course of action, their own futures. Even if you want to try to compare what happened on October the 7th to what we did in March of 2003, which of course you can't. What we did was fucking atrocity. Lastly, the last quote-unquote atrocity that you think that Hamas may or may not have committed, the taking of hostages. Well, there are supposedly still 103 left who are alive. I thought if they were so fucking ruthless and bloodthirsty and just committing atrocities, they would have been raped to death or killed that day and then raped and then had beheaded babies stuffed up their butts. They took them and they kept them alive, and they're feeding them, and they're keeping them alive, and they're giving them the medicines they need and the health care they need. We know that because when they first released some before, they came out and said they treated us very well, and there were images of old ladies walking up and saying goodbye to the guys and them saying goodbye back to them. Oh, no, don't do that. Don't show that. And so then they forbid, the Israelis forbid the fucking hostages from saying anything nice about the captives, the people who held them captive. They forbid it. It's in the national interest that you fucking lie and try to make all the other family members think that their family members who are still being held hostage are constantly being beaten and tortured and raped and having beheaded babies stuffed up their asses. That's in the national interest in Israel. Not the truth. The truth is never in the national interest in Israel. So, is that an atrocity? Taking hostages? It's certainly not what I would fucking do. However, Anna Kasparian and fucking Cenk Uygur, I will offer you this. You need to walk a mile in someone's moccasins before you condemn their approach to liberation. What does that mean? That means I don't live in Palestine. I don't live in Gaza. I don't live in the West Bank. 500 and some Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank by the psychotic fucking Zionists, rabid fucking settlers, since October the 7th. 500, which is phenomenal. No one talks about it. There are atrocities taking place right now in fucking West Bank as well. I don't live in the West Bank. I don't live in Gaza. I don't know what it's like to live under that kind of pressure. So, and God knows, since October the 8th, I don't know. Is it worth it to pull the temple down around you on your own head if you think on the other side of the 6 month, 7 month, 8 month, 9 month fucking suffering and the 36,000, 40,000, 42,000 dead fucking Palestinians, is it worth it if on the other side there's a recognition of Palestine as a state and an end to this conflict between Israel and Palestine? Is all of this worth it? That's the metric. That's the fucking calculus. Bo, stop it. That's the metric. That's the calculus. I can't make that determination. I can't say whether or not taking a few hostages rather than killing them, I can't say whether taking a few hostages is such an atrocity that I wouldn't think about it. I wouldn't do it. Because let's face it, that was their plan. That was their plan. Kill soldiers, kill the militia, kill anybody who resisted, but take as many civilians and IDF people as we can, or policemen as you can, hostage and bring them back here, because they knew that the bombing would take place and the hostages would be a thing to negotiate with, and that's what would, keep the thing rolling. So their plan wasn't to kill hostages. Their plan wasn't to kill civilians. It was to bring some civilians back and some police people back. The vast majority of the people who were killed, the civilians who were killed by the IDF. The vast majority of the atrocities committed on October the 7th were committed by the IDF. And anybody, any fucking body, even a cute little blonde with her self-righteous indignation on the progressive alt-left news station, the Young Turks, anybody telling you that Hamas has to go, the work that they're working for Ben Gvir, Benjamin Netanyahu, and all the fucking Zionists inside of Israel and out. Because the only way for them to go is to continue the fucking hostilities, which means no ceasefire. If that is the baseline, Hamas has to go, then you're promoting the continuation of the fucking genocide, which is exactly what she's doing. And she's doing it in ways that she can't be held, talking about the atrocities. You know what she's trying to plant in your head? Beheaded babies, rapes, babies in the ovens. She's putting the atrocities idea in your head, talking about 1,200 people, civilians. All of these things are lies. All of these things are lies. What she is doing is called controlled opposition. And the same people who sent checks to that fucker who made up the bullshit story about a baby in an oven are probably writing checks right now to Anna Kasparian and Jen Kuger. Just so you know.